Another day, another rainstorm. But that's okay. You and I can sit together and have a warm drink and some wonderful stories here around the fire. Welcome, once again, to Cozy Horror. With me, Dr. Plague. I've got another 5 great stories from 5 great writers. So let's hop right in and see what today's stories have in store. Our first story comes to us from Dusk in the Green, and it's about a particular voyeur who may be a little out of the ordinary. Let's hear about what watches from the corner.
My Uncle Phil was a detective in Los Angeles. He died last week, age 75. He'd been blinded in the line of duty in 1993 and got a sweet payout. Only time I ever saw Uncle Phil get upset was when we asked the details of how he lost his sight. He refused to tell us, and even talk about it. My mom and brother and I spent the weekend clearing out his house. Uncle Phil was a nice guy overall, but he was also something of a hoarder. It took us 15 hours to get the place even close to clean. In the basement, we found his filing cabinet behind a stack of boxes labeled Men's Adventure books. The filing cabinet was locked. After my mom and brother had gone for the night, I got my buddy Reuben to come over and try to get the filing cabinet open. Reuben fashions himself as a lockpicker. Took him 16 tries. I was counting, but he finally got it unlocked. In the bottom drawer at the back was a large envelope dated 2008, marked Destroy. Guess he must have forgotten to follow through on it. Inside was a typed transcript of the very last interrogation my Uncle Phil ever did as a detective. There was also an LP, a slab of black vinyl with no sticker. No markings on it at all. I don't have a record player, but Reuben, he said he moonlights as a DJ, and he had one at his pad. So I let him take the record and rip it, send me an MP. He left, and I brought the transcripts upstairs. I read it, and it scared the crap out of me. I was in a panic afterward. I called Reuben, but he didn't answer. I tried his roommates, but they said he hadn't come home. That was 2 days ago. No one's seen Reuben, and his phone's no longer in service. This afternoon I got an anonymous email with an untitled MP3 file. I haven't opened it. I will never open it. I'm posting this transcript of my Uncle Phil's last interrogation here. I'm doing it as a warning. I know record collectors will call me paranoid, but I'm telling you, avoid unlabeled LPs you find at the thrift store or old record crates. If you sent or somehow come across an untitled MP3, be very careful. If it says anything about the Drawn King, delete it immediately. California Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, Investigating Supplement, 1993-78409, transcript 8/6/1993. PH. The coffee is just on your left. WS. Here? PH. I can help you get it if you... WS. No, I'm fine. Thank you. PH. Alright, okay. It's presently 1640 at August 6, 1993. Detective Phil Hernandez, currently at the Van Nuys Station at Van Nuys, California, to interview Captain Wyatt Shepard. This is for LAPD case number 1993-784. Wyatt, I want to go ahead and get down some basic information for our report. Your first name is spelled W-Y-A-T-T. Is that correct? W-S. Yeah. And Shepard is spelled S-H-E-P-P-A-R-D. Right. And your occupation is firefighter. Yes, Captain. Listen, I can explain what happened. We're getting to that. First, I just need a little more background information. You told my officer at intake that this began 2 days ago after an incident. You have to understand, I tried to stop it. Wyatt, I need you to start at the beginning. I need you to take me back to the night of the fire at Burbank. You just told my officer that all this, everything that went down with Mr. Carson, it started with the fire. I want to hear why you think that. Okay, it was the apartment. That was the fire at the Oakcrest apartment on Myers, right? Right. Our engine was the first one on the scene. A 2-alarm on the second floor. Everyone had been evacuated by the time we got there. All but one person on the 3rd floor. The east corner. The manager said his name was Nash. Something Nash. The man was a recluse. Hadn't been out of his room in something like 20 years. Had his food, his clothes, all his stuff delivered to his door. Never stepped a foot outside. So the manager told me. You, went to Mr. Nash's door, brought him out. Wasn't that easy. Fire was spreading quick. Me and Tomlinson, Nadia Tomlinson, part of your truck company. Yes, she and I took the east stairs. It was smoky, but we still had visibility at that time. Mr. Nash didn't respond to our knocks, our shouts, so we used a battering ram. Took down the door and then stepped inside. That's when we noticed that it was weird. You mentioned weird how? The whole interior. These were regular apartments, built in the 50s or so. 1 or 2 bedrooms, most of them. The typical layout. Not this guy's place. His apartment was totally modified. All the walls were rounded out. Rounded? What do you mean? He'd smoothed them all down to remove the corners. There were no corners in the place. No windows either. It was like being inside a big egg. He had painted them white, too. Wasn't done professionally, if you know what I mean. It was clear that the work was of one person over years and years. Just filling in the corners, smoothing them out. And the furniture was like that as well. Yes, all the chairs were beanbags. The tables were sliced tree trunks. It was crazy, but we weren't in there to examine the decor. We were in there to get Mr. Nash out. He wasn't going to come easy. He was guarding this wall full of records. Like the records you smashed at the station. The records I smashed and scattered across the field behind the station. Yeah, we found the pieces. But you didn't put them back together, right? You couldn't do that. No, we haven't put the pieces together. You need to burn them, to melt them. Wyatt, we've gotten off track. Tell me about the apartment. Nash had tons of those records, easily 1,000, all stacked up, and he was holding one of them, sitting on his futon mattress and yelling this crazy stuff about how he couldn't leave, how if he left the apartment, he'd die. You gotta understand, the building was heating up. Smoke was filling the hallways. We had to get out, so we went to grab him, and that's when he pulled the revolver. He put it to his head, said he'd rather lose control over his own death. As me and Tomlinson were getting close, trying to calm him down, he pulled the trigger, and it didn't fire. It was an old firearm. I didn't get a good look at it. Maybe it was busted. Anyway, I was able to smack the gun out of his hand, and we got him up and out. That's when you lost him. I didn't. We didn't lose him. We got out into the hallway, and he was carrying on, acting crazy. The smoke was so bad. We had respirators on. Put one on him, too. Had the added benefit of keeping him quiet. We moved fast down the hall towards the stairs, but the flames were coming up, right up behind the floor, so we had to stop. This is right outside the apartment, 312. Yeah, somewhere near there, I guess. I wasn't looking. Okay, go on. So I have Mr. Nash back in the corner, right behind me. Tomlinson is radioing down, trying to get help, trying to help the guided crews. They've got the hoses hitting that part of the building, putting down those fires long enough for us to get back. Maybe it's been 2 minutes? Probably less. Nash is right behind me, holding one of those records and mumbling all scared. He's terrified and pulling on my coat. I turn and look at him, tell him it's only been a few seconds. That's when he shouts something freaky. He says, "He's here." I asked Nash who he was talking about, because I was worried, you know? Did we miss somebody? But at the same time, I had to turn back to Tomlinson, because she was giving the signal that we can move forward. That's when I hear it. You said it was a whistle. Yeah, it was like a little lullaby. Just a few notes, sing-songy, the way you'd do to a baby. Someone else in the apartment building? No, it sounded further away than that. Like from outside, like above the apartment building. But that's just what I heard, a whistling, a tune. The thing is, fires are loud. That's what most people don't think about when they sound like tornadoes. Just this blasting industrial sound. But I could hear that whistle over the flames. It was crystal clear. And it was just the once. Yes, just the once. And this guy Nash, he screams like he's being murdered. The worst scream I've ever heard. He's behind me still, right? I haven't turned around or anything, but I've heard people screaming before, in fires, several times. Horrible sounds. It'll haunt you. When I tell you that, they say, "Oh, you must hate going to amusement parks." But that's not it. People screaming on roller coasters or... right. But that's not the same sound. What I'm talking about is, actually, it's playgrounds. I can't go to regular parks. For me, it's hearing children scream, even if it's because they're playing, having fun. The pitch is high and piercing, and that's what someone dying in a fire sounds like. Broken glass, screaming as the superheated air hits the lining of the throat. Anyway, this was worse than that. To be honest, it sounded like Nash was being turned inside out. So of course I reacted. I spun around to him and he's gone. He's just gone. And the record he was holding is lying there next to a little pool of blood. That's it. Poof. And Mr. Nash couldn't have just snuck past you. How? I had him in a corner. My back pressed up against him. I would have felt him push past. Would have seen him going down the hall. No. He was just gone. Vanished. All right. You couldn't find him. You get back outside. We looked. We looked everywhere, but the fire was growing and the other engine hadn't showed up yet. So we had to leave the building. I took the record and we exited. The next 3 hours we fought the fire. Didn't put it out until nearly 2 a.m. The record was supposed to be handed to the officer on the scene. I know, but in the chaos, it ended up with us, in the engine and then back to the station. As soon as I noticed it, I called Stefan. Officer De Novo. Yes, he's a friend. We belong to the same gym. We know a couple of the same people. So when I saw I had the record, I called him. He said I should hang on to it and he'd swing by the station to grab it the next day. It wasn't like we considered the thing evidence, or right then it was just Nash that was missing. That record have a sleeve or a jacket or whatever? No, it was just a disc. Corners, right? Sleeve would have had corners. Your truck company consisted of 5 firefighters. You, Captain, Nadia Tomlinson, Lieutenant, Dave Carlson, driver, Jalen Ordelia, and Grace Zhang, firefighters. Yes, and they all saw the record. We looked it over together. Was there anything written on it, or... Yes, the label. It was printed. Like, this thing was pressed and legit. I don't know much about vinyl, but it didn't look homemade or anything. And what did the label say? It had some numbers, and then just this one phrase. Not like a song list or a band name or anything, just this one phrase printed on it. It said, "Play me, and I'll come to you." And did you? Yes, we did. We put it on the turntable in the break room, and all of us sat around and listened to it for a few minutes. First 15 seconds were just tones, like electronic noises. And then there was, I don't know, like a field recording,
like someone was outside with a microphone. There was wind and chimes and maybe trees rustling and footsteps crunching on rocks and pebbles. Then a voice came on. It was Nash.
You're saying he made the record?
It was his voice for sure, but like a lot younger. I'm guessing it was recorded 20 years ago at least, maybe even longer.
What was he saying?
It's like a spell, near as I can describe it. It's him speaking English and chanting stuff. Can't recall all the words, but the phrases were a bunch of craziness. The weirdest one was like, "Cyst with twins inside, the edge of light, and praise the blood-ridden splinters in the hands of the sepulchral seers." All of it garbage, right? I thought so at the time. I really thought so, but at the end of the record, it was just 10 minutes long of chanting. Nash says, "I conjure you. You are sown. You are here. You are grown. The drawn king. Come to me."
The Drawn King.
Right. That was the name. What he called it. The talking stopped there. Then we're all sitting in the rec room, right? We've all just come from this fire and we're cooling down and getting some much needed downtime. But that record, all of us, we were on edge. I looked around the room and even Jalen, the coolest guy, he was looking anxious as all hell. Grace wanted to just shut it off right then and there, but we didn't. That's the thing I most regret. We didn't.
So what happened?
The record kept going. Those sounds of wind and chimes and rustling of trees, and then the whistling. It drifted in, soft at first, and then louder and closer. It was the same whistling that I heard at the Oakcrest apartment. Same exact one. I got chills. My whole body just felt electric in the worst way. Like that inbuilt threat system we have. The primal one. It was going crazy, warning me.
Warning you about what?
That bad stuff was going on. The whistling drifted away again. And then Nash came into the microphone and I'm just recalling it from memory, okay? He said, "I've done the conjuring. You heard it with me. Now you are tuned. Tuned today. Tuned 10 years from now." That was the word. Tuned. Then he said, "And if you want the Drawn King to come to you, look in the nearest corner and let him in. He's always watching you from the corners, always waiting to come through. Stare back at him. Stare into the corner. Then count to 6 very slowly, saying his name each time. Do not blink. Do not turn away. You will hear the whistle, and that means he's approaching. From then on, when you see him, he will come to you, and he will set you free." That's what Nash said. That's when the recording ended. Him being the Drawn King. Does that mean anything to you? No, never heard of it. Of him.
And this whole thing about corners, you're talking regular corners, like the walls here?
Yes, any corner. Any 3 edges meeting. I suppose it could be as small as the corner of a cereal box, or as big as the corner of a building.
I never really thought of corners as being particularly scary.
That's because corners aren't a thing you usually think about, right? Like on a daily basis or anything. But if you do think about them, if you really focus on the idea, you'll feel this tremor in your gut. And you'll realize that corners, they're something you've always been uneasy looking at. That's why Nash's place was the way it was. See, that's what I realized. His apartment, Nash got rid of the corners in his place, because he conjured the Drawn King, and he wasn't safe. Like the record said, you can call him, you can see him, and he comes to you. Maybe Nash thought it was a good idea at first, you know. People who are into magic, they always use it to try and summon spirits and things, whatever, to become rich or find love or get power. But this thing, the Drawn King, I'm guessing Nash wasn't prepared.
You told Officer Rollins that you think Mr. Nash was taken by this, Drawn King.
Yes,
And you also said that he or it took Dave Carson.
Yes, Dave disappeared. Same way as Nash.
Well, most of him disappeared. Officers recovered Dave's lungs and larynx at your fire station.
You have to understand.
I'm trying to, Wyatt. To be frank, it sounds crazy.
I know that, but you don't see what I've seen.
Explain it to me then. What exactly happened to Mr. Carson?
After we listened to the record, everyone got upset, creeped out. Tomlinson, Jalen, Grace, they went upstairs to bed to tune out. Me and Dave, we went to the kitchen. Late night snack. Dave used to whip up these meatball sandwiches that, Anyway, he was one of those tough city kids, kicked out of his house when he was in high school. Minor miracle that he made it to 21. Even bigger miracle that he got into the academy. Dave and I had our run-ins, a few tussles, but he was a good firefighter. Laser focused when he was on the job, and total clown when he wasn't. That clown side, the Joker, that's why he decided to try it out. To prove that it was all crap. That the apartment, the record, the Drawn King, they were all just products of Nash's sick mind.
Okay, so what happened?
Well, Dave and I, we tried it.
Tried what?
Well, like I said, we were in the kitchen, at the table. Dave turned his chair around and pointed to the corner. It was across the room. I think we kept some gear there at one time, but it was empty. Only dust and shadows. So he stares at it, stares at the corner, starts to count. With each number, he says the name, the Drawn King. We're laughing at first, but we can't both help but feel the pressure. I don't know how to explain it, like when a storm is approaching, and you can feel the heaviness come down, fill the air with electricity. Soon we were both counting, slow and saying his name, and our eyes are locked on the corner. We couldn't look away. So we get to 6, and that's when we hear it, the whistle.
Like at the apartment fire.
Yeah, just the same. Just as haunting as on the record. A lullaby. Just a few notes.
And this was coming from outside.
It was distant, like on the edge of hearing, but it wasn't outside. It sounded exactly like it was coming from behind the corner, like right inside of it.
And you went and looked?
I jumped up with my flashlight and walked over, keeping the beam on the corner. There was nothing there, just dust. Me and Dave were both shaken, though. Had that rubber-legged feeling you get when you step off a roller coaster. Adrenaline pumping through us. We went upstairs, and we came up with all sorts of ways to dismiss what had happened.
And the rest of your company, they were
asleep.
None of them heard that whistle?
No.
All right, go on.
I was in the bathroom washing my face when I heard it again. The whistle. Only it was real close this time. Too close, like right there in the room with me. So I look up into the mirror and I see the corner of the bathroom behind me, and I see him. I swear to God, I see him coming out of the corner, staring right at me.
Who was staring at you, Wyatt?
The Drawn King. I just knew it was him.
This was a person?
Maybe once, but something horrible had happened. He was on the floor, crouched down like an animal, peeking out from the corner at me. His face was all twisted.
Twisted? Twisted how?
A couple years ago, we were called to a food processing plant. Guy there, he fell into one of those industrial mixers, the kind with the massive stainless steel whisks. It pulled him like taffy. Taffy with bones in it, and that's what the Drawn King looked like. Only he was moving, alive, staring at me. I closed my eyes, and when I opened them, he was gone. That's when I heard something downstairs.
And Dave Carson, was he upstairs with you still, or?
He was in the bay, holding an axe and a flashlight, looking under the engines, all panicked and sweating. Dave nearly cut me in half when I came up on him.
I'd said his name aloud, but he was too far gone. I asked him what he was doing, and he told me someone was after him. Someone all bent and warped out of shape. I knew he'd caught a glimpse of him too. We searched the garage every inch, but we didn't find anything. Did you rouse the others, or... No. We were feeling foolish. Neither of us wanted to admit that we were seeing things, and the same things at that. I figured we were just exhausted, stressed out. We talked about it maybe being PTSD from the encounter with Nash, but Dave hadn't been inside the apartment. So we turned on all the lights in the kitchen and just sat there. Tried to stay calm. We had some tea. Dave said he thought it could be something he'd read about in a book when we were taking classes at the community college. Something called Folie. That's a mental condition, correct? Yes, it's where two people share the same psychotic delusion. Like seeing something following you. Something coming out from the corner. I mean, I'd never heard of it before, but it made sense. We both had listened to the record, stared at the corner, counted and said the name. We heard the whistle. Maybe we both had a mental break at the same time, you know? Stranger things have happened, right? Anyway, that kind of calmed me down. Calmed us both down. All right. There was no way we were going back to sleep. Dawn was close. Lights were all on. And after a couple hours of quiet, of not seeing anything, we kind of felt stupid. Like kids who scare themselves telling ghost stories or trying to freak each other out. Nash, the record, it had all gotten under our skin. Dave wanted to smoke. He'd do it in the parking lot out back. This time, though, we kept the door open, just in case. I don't know if it was so we could keep an eye on each other, or for me to keep tabs on him. Again, our nerves had gotten fried. Our minds were getting the best of us. So Dave goes over to the door, pushes it open, and steps out. But he keeps his foot there, so, I can see him. It's dark out there, but there's a light in the lot, so it's not like... Anyway, he lights up a smoke, takes a couple drags, kind of laughs. I remember that. Then we hear it again. The whistle. Only this time, it's okay. Take a break. What'd you hear? The whistle. It wasn't like before. It wasn't off in the distance or above us or outside in the corner. It was loud, like thunder, enough to make us want to cover our ears, like an air raid siren, and Dave turned to look at me, and we both knew. My God, in that split second, we both knew, and I don't know how to describe it, but it was like our souls just shattered. He knew it was the end. His eyes locked onto me, and take your time. He screamed. Dave screamed the same as Nash, the same as someone being burned alive. As he screamed, his eyes just boring holes into mine, his pain and fear, and he turned to look outside at the corner of the station, and as the Drawn King grabbed him, he dragged Dave inside on his belly. Dave's nails grinded desperately against the asphalt. The door slammed shut. You saw this. Yes, I saw the Drawn King's arm, his hands. Those fingers were too long, too sharp. He had Dave by the back, and there was blood spraying everywhere. And I ran out there after him, yelling his name, and kicked open the door, and there was his cigarette, still lit, still smoking, and there was a big puddle of thick blood and body parts, pieces. No sign of the rest of Dave Carson. No sign. I swear to God, he was gone, and this Drawn King took him. I know how it sounds, okay? I do. But you didn't wake the others or call the cops, right? You did something else. Yes, I went back inside, into the kitchen. The record that Nash had made, it was sitting there on the counter, and I smashed it. Then as the sun was coming up, I threw the pieces into the field. That's when I realized that Nash, he'd defeated the Drawn King by rounding off all the corners in his apartment, right? It kept him safe for decades. I couldn't do that. How was I going to do that? So I realized
there was another way. You cut your eyes out. With a potato peeler. I suppose a knife or a pin would have been easier. Why did you do that, Wyatt? It was the thing I remembered Nash saying on the record. I guess maybe he didn't think of it, or he didn't have the guts to go through with it. Me, I didn't want to be trapped like a zoo animal the way he was, so I figured I'd do the other thing. If I can't see the Drawn King, then he can't come to me. I'm pretty sure my 5-year-old nephew thinks the same way. Obviously it worked. I'm here, aren't I? Yeah, you're here. It's a good thing those records burned, but I smashed up the very last one. Dave Carson's dead, Wyatt. Torn to pieces, basically, and you're the last person seen him. I should remind you that according to your company, Nadia Tomlinson, Grace Zhang, when they came downstairs at the fire station, they found quite a scene. Your eyeballs on the kitchen counter, Dave Carson missing, big puddle of blood, you babbling about things coming out of the corners. That's a bad look. Miss Tomlinson, she says you were acting strange after the fire, after listening to the record, and as you said, you and Dave had run-ins before. I didn't kill him. Your fingerprints were on Dave Tomlinson's windpipe. His blood was also all over your hands. I told you that's how I found him. You're going to be charged with Mr. Carson's murder, Wyatt. Well, I won't be convicted. I didn't do it. I'll prove it in court. We got a lot of evidence to the contrary. And besides, I've heard the record. What? Sit down. Now listen to me. In the basement of the Oakcrest apartment, there's a storage room that survived the fire. And the water. We did a thorough investigation and found 2 boxes of Nash's records. I listened to one of them last night. Your description is very accurate. In fact, I got the record here on the table in front of you. So you know. It's just a creepy novelty record is all. A joke. The contents of the box, the other records. We dropped them off at a donation center. Please! I don't want this to... Do what, Wyatt? Confess to killing Mr. Carlson? No. Wyatt, you're kidding me, right? You think that if I look at the corner right now, if I, count to 6 and say the Drawn King over and over again, that he'll appear like Mephistopheles? Please, I'm begging you. You heard the record. I'm going to prove to you that the Drawn King don't exist, that you've been tainted by that record, by your own mental illness, your deep-seated hatred for Mr. Carson. Don't. For the record, no pun intended, I'm turning on the record to my left, on the floor. It's empty, maybe a dust bunny or 2. Certainly nothing scary or twisted there. And I'm staring at the corner. Here we go. 1, the Drawn King. 2, the Drawn King. 3, Don't do this, detective, please! 3, the Drawn King. 4, the Drawn King. 5, the Drawn King. I'm begging you! 6, the Drawn King. And now, how long, Wyatt? No. I don't hear nothing. No whistle, no creepy noises at all. And I'm looking and... Nope, there's no person hiding in the corner. Guess I was right about the dust bunnies. Note, an audible whistle is heard on the tape recorder. It is of medium volume, melodic. Oh, God. Don't mess with me, Wyatt. You heard it. He's coming. I'll be back in a few minutes. You stay seated and... Jesus! What is... You see him. I know you see him. What is... No. Use your pen. There's a garbled scream, believed to be from Detective Hernandez. Tape cuts out then. Such a great story. But this channel seems to be full of great stories. And not just mine. It's been the place where many of you have found so many talented writers. And I'm glad to be the soapbox for their wonderful stories and their amazing talent. Moving right along, and speaking of great writers on this channel, I've got a story about a life insurance agent. who might be biting off a little bit more than he can chew. Coming to us from the very talented Society Menace, CC, let's hear about a life insurance agent.
The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I shuffled through the stacks of applications on my desk. Another day, another pile of desperate people hoping to secure some fragment of security in an uncertain world. I'd been working at Everlast Life Insurance for over a decade, and the faces all kind of blurred together after a while. Young families, middle-aged divorcees, elderly folks grasping at one last chance to leave something behind. I'd seen it all. Or so I thought. It was late on a Friday afternoon when his file crossed my desk. Most of my co-workers had already left for the weekend, their vacant cubicles forming a maze of shadows in the dimming office. I should have been out the door myself, but something made me pause as I reached for my coat. Maybe it was the worn edges of the manila folder, or the faded photograph paperclipped to the front. Whatever it was, I found myself sinking back into my chair, flipping open the files of Mr. Ezekiel Thorne. The photo showed a withered old man, his skin like crumpled parchment, stretched over sharp bones. But it was his eyes that gave me pause. Pale blue and piercing, they seemed to stare right through the camera and into my soul. I shivered involuntarily and turned to the application itself. Ezekiel Thorne, age 92, no living relatives, former occupation, mortician, current address, 13 Ravens Lane. As I scanned his medical history, my eyebrows steadily crept higher. This man should have been dead 10 times over. Heart attacks, cancer, strokes, he'd survived it all. Now here he was, the ripe old age of 92, applying for a substantial life insurance policy. I'll admit, a small part of me was impressed. The old codger had beaten the odds time and time again. But the larger part, the part that had kept me employed at Everlast for all these years, saw only dollar signs and risk. There was no way the company would approve this. The potential payout far outweighed any premium that we could charge. So with a sigh, I reached for the large red denied stamp. It's just business, after all. It wasn't personal. As the stamp came down with a dull thud, a chill ran down my spine. For a split second, I could have sworn I saw those pale blue eyes staring at me from the shadow of my cubicle. I whipped around, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. Just the empty office and the ever-present hum of the fluorescent lights. Get it together, I told myself. You're working too late. It's time to go home. I hurriedly shoved Mr. Thorne's file into the outgoing mail and grabbed my coat. As I rushed out the office, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching me. The weight of that gaze seemed to follow me all the way to my car. That night I dreamed of pale blue eyes and the smell of formaldehyde. The next week passed in a blur of routine. I processed applications, attended meetings, did my best to forget about Ezekiel Thorne. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the lingering unease that had taken root in the pit of my stomach. It was exactly 1 week later when I heard the news. I was in the break room, pouring my third cup of coffee, when I overheard 2 co-workers gossiping by the vending machine. Did you hear about that old man who died last night? The one who lived in that creepy house on Ravens Lane? I froze, my mug halfway to my lips. Oh yeah, what was his name? Thornton or Thorne? Ezekiel Thorne, I whispered, my voice barely audible. My co-workers turned to look at me, startled. Yeah, that's it. Did you know him? I couldn't answer. The room was spinning, the fluorescent lights suddenly too bright. I mumbled some excuse and stumbled back to my cubicle, collapsing into my chair. It was just a coincidence, I told myself. Old people die all the time. It had nothing to do with me or the denied application. But as I sat there, trying to calm my racing heart, I couldn't help but remember those piercing blue eyes. And I could have sworn I caught a whiff of formaldehyde drifting through the recycled office air. That night I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mr. Thorne's wrinkled face, his eyes accusing and full of malice. When I finally drifted off in the early hours of the morning, my dreams were haunted by the sound of a pen scratching endlessly across paper, filling out an application that would never be approved. I awoke with a start, drenched in sweat, as my eyes adjusted to the darkness. I realized with growing horror that the scratching sound hadn't stopped. It was coming from outside my bedroom door. Trembling, I reached for the bedside lamp. As the light flooded the room, the scratching abruptly ceased. I held my breath, straining to hear any movement from the hallway beyond. For a long time, there was only silence. Then, slowly, deliberately, something slid under my door. A manila folder, its edges worn and familiar. With shaking hands, I picked it up, opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. At the top, in spidery handwriting, were the words, "Life insurance application." The rest of the page was blank, save for 2 words stamped at the bottom. Claim denied. I let out a strangled cry and threw the folder across the room. This couldn't be happening. This was a bad dream, a hallucination brought on by stress and lack of sleep. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to wake up. When I opened them again, the folder was gone. But the faint smell of formaldehyde lingered in the air, and I knew with sickening certainty that this was only the beginning. The next morning I called in sick to work. I couldn't face the office, couldn't bear to look at another insurance application. Spent the day huddled in my apartment, jumping at every creak and shadow. By nightfall, I had almost convinced myself that it had all been my imagination. Almost. As darkness fell, I found myself drawn to my computer. With trembling fingers, I typed Ezekiel Thorne into the search bar. What I found chilled me to the bone. The first result was an obituary, dated 2 days ago. But it wasn't the date that caught my attention. It was the photo. The man in the photo was undoubtedly Ezekiel Thorne, but he looked wrong. His skin was waxy, his posture too stiff, and his eyes, those pale blue eyes that had haunted my dreams, were open, staring directly at the camera. I slammed my laptop shut, my heart pounding. That couldn't be right. No funeral home would publish a photo like that. Would they? A soft thud from the hallway made me jump. I froze, listening intently. Another thud, closer this time. Then another. It sounded like footsteps. Slow, dragging footsteps, approaching my door. I held my breath, praying it was just a neighbor. The footsteps stopped right outside my apartment. For a long time, there was only silence. Then came the knock. 3 slow, deliberate raps that seemed to echo through my entire body. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Maybe if I played perfectly still, whoever or whatever was out there would just go away. Another knock, louder this time. Then a voice, dry and raspy, like dead leaves, skittering across the pavement.
"I know you're there, Mr. Insurance Man. We have unfinished business."
I bit back a scream. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening.
"You denied my claim,"
The voice continued,
seeping under my door like a noxious gas.
But I'm not finished yet. Not by a long shot.
The doorknob began to turn, metal scraping against metal. I watched in terror as it slowly rotated, defying the deadbolt that I knew was securely in place. Just as the door began to creak open, I snapped out of my paralysis. I ran to my bedroom, slamming and locking the door behind me. I could hear shuffling footsteps in the living room, getting closer.
You can't hide from death forever,
the voice called out, now just outside the bedroom door.
Sooner or later, someone's policy comes due.
I blinked, backing away from the door, looking wildly around for an escape route. The window caught my eye. I was only on the 3rd floor. I could make that jump. I had to. The bedroom doorknob began to turn. I didn't hesitate. I flung open the window and climbed out onto the narrow ledge. Cool night air hit me like a slap, clearing some of the panic from my mind. What was I doing? This was insane. I was 3 stories up, clinging to the side of a building, because I thought a dead man was trying to get into my apartment. I slowly turned back towards the window, ready to climb back inside and face whatever madness awaited me. But as I peered through the glass, my blood ran cold. Ezekiel Thorne stood in my bedroom, his pale blue eyes locked onto mine. His skin was gray and mottled, his suit the same one he'd been buried in. As I watched in horror, he raised one withered hand and beckoned to me. I lost my balance, my foot slipping off the ledge. For one heart-stopping moment, I teetered on the edge of oblivion. Then I was falling, the ground rushing up to meet me. I woke up in the hospital 3 days later. Multiple fractures. The doctors told me I was lucky to be alive. As I lay there trying to piece together what had happened, a nurse came in with a small package. "This was left for you at the front desk," she said, placing it on my bedside table. With a sense of dread, I opened the package. Inside was a life insurance policy from Everlast. My own company had apparently taken out a policy on me without my knowledge. There at the bottom of the page was a familiar red stamp, claim denied. I started to laugh, the sound bordering on hysterics. The nurse looked at me with concern, but I couldn't stop, because there in the corner of the room I could see a pair of pale blue eyes watching me from the shadow. This was far from over. The next few weeks were a blur of hospital rooms and physical therapy. I told myself that what I'd experienced was just a vivid hallucination brought on by the stress and lack of sleep. The fall from my window, a moment of sleepwalking, nothing more. I almost believed it. But every night, as the hospital grew quiet and the shadows lengthened, I could feel those eyes on me. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of a withered figure at the end of the hallway, or hear the shuffle of feet outside my door. The night staff whispered about the smell of formaldehyde that seemed to linger in my room, no matter how much they cleaned it. I was released from the hospital on a gray, drizzly Tuesday. As the taxi pulled up at my apartment, I felt a surge of panic. I couldn't go back there. I couldn't face those eyes, the room where I'd seen him. "Keep driving," I told the cabbie, giving him the address of a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. That night, as I lay in the lumpy motel bed, I finally allowed myself to think about what had happened. If Ezekiel Thorne was really dead, and I'd seen his obituary, hadn't I, then how could he be haunting me? And why? 'Cause I denied his life insurance application? It didn't make sense. None of this made sense. A soft knock at the door made me jump. I held my breath, waiting. Came again, more insistent this time.
Mr. Life Insurance Man.
That dry, raspy voice called out again.
You can't run forever. Your policy is coming due.
I bolted upright, my heart pounding. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not again. The doorknob began to turn. I scrambled out of bed, looking frantically for an escape route. The bathroom window was small, but I was desperate enough to try squeezing through it. As I rushed towards the bathroom, the motel room door creaked open behind me. The smell hit me first, a nauseating mixture of formaldehyde and decay. I slammed the bathroom door shut and locked it, my hands shaking so badly I could barely manage the simple task. Shuffling footsteps grew closer.
Now,
Ezekiel's voice rasped just outside the bathroom door.
Is that any way to treat a client? We have a policy to discuss.
I turned on the faucet full blast, hoping to drown out his words. Somehow his voice cut through the rush of water, clear as a bell, though.
You denied me a life, Mr. Insurance Man, but death is a much more accommodating underwriter.
The doorknob rattled. I backed away, pressing myself against the small window. It was stuck, decades of paint sealing it shut. I clawed at it, desperate, fingernails breaking as I tried to force it open. A bony hand burst through the door, splintering wood as if it were paper. I screamed, a sound of pure terror that I barely recognized as my own. My hands groped around, finding the lock and turning it with a decisive click. The door swung open. I finally managed to break the seal on the window. I didn't even bother to clear away the broken glass before I started to squeeze through the tiny opening. The shards slashed at my skin, but I barely felt the pain. All I could focus on was my escape. I tumbled out onto the wet pavement of the motel's back alley, the rain soaking me instantly. I scrambled to my feet and ran, not daring to look back. I ran and ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out, finally collapsing in a park several miles away. As I sat there gasping for breath, shivering in the cold rain, I tried to make sense of what was happening. This couldn't go on. I couldn't keep running forever. There had to be a way to end this, to appease the spirit of Ezekiel Thorne. With sudden clarity, I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I dragged myself into Everlast Insurance office. My colleagues stared as I limped past, clothes torn and stained, face gaunt with exhaustion and fear. I ignored them all, making my way straight to the records room. It took me hours of searching, but I finally found what I was looking for. Ezekiel Thorne's original application. With shaking hands, I pulled out a pen and changed the denied stamp to approved. Filled out the necessary paperwork, backdating it to before his death. As I signed the final form, I felt a chill run down my spine. Slowly, I turned around. Ezekiel Thorne stood there, a grotesque smile stretching his decaying face.
Well done, Mr. Insurance Man, but I'm afraid it's too late for that.
I blinked, and suddenly I was back in my apartment, sitting at my desk. The insurance papers were gone. In their place was a single document. My own death certificate, dated today.
You see, your policies come due the moment you denied mine. Everything since then, that was just a grace period.
I felt a bony hand on my shoulder, and the world began to fade away. I woke up screaming, tangled in sheets, soaked in sweat. My heart was racing, and for a moment I couldn't remember where I was. As reality slowly seeped back in, I realized I was in my own bed, in my own apartment. It had all been a nightmare, a vivid, terrifying dream, but
A nightmare, nonetheless. Relief washed over me, followed quickly by embarrassment. How could I have let a simple insurance application affect me so deeply? I glanced at the clock. It was 3:07 in the morning. With a sigh, I got up to get a glass of water, hoping it would calm my nerves. The hallway was empty, shadows stretching in the dim light. I let out a shaky laugh. Get a grip, I told myself. It was just a dream. I turned back towards the kitchen, found myself face to face with Ezekiel Thorne. His pale blue eyes bored into mine, his withered face inches from my own. The smell of formaldehyde was overwhelming.
"Sweet dreams, Mr. Insurance Man," he rasped.
Then with a bony finger he reached out and tapped me on the forehead. I jolted awake, gasping for air. My bedroom was dark and quiet. No sign of any undead visitors. Just another nightmare, but as I reached up to wipe the sweat from my brow, my blood ran cold. There in the center of my forehead, I felt a small cold spot, exactly where Ezekiel's finger had touched me in my dream. I scrambled out of bed and rushed to the bathroom, flipping on the lights. In the mirror, I saw a small, perfectly round bruise forming on my forehead. As I stared at it in horror, I could have sworn I saw pale eyes reflecting in the mirror behind me. I whirled around, but the bathroom was empty. I looked back at the mirror. The eyes were gone. But the bruise remained. A tangible reminder that the lines between nightmare and reality had blurred. From that night on, sleep became the enemy. Every time I closed my eyes, Ezekiel was waiting. Sometimes he chased me through the endless twisting corridors. Other times he simply stood and watched, those pale blue eyes never blinking. Always I woke up to new bruises, scratches, or other inexplicable marks. During the day I was a wreck. I couldn't focus on work. I jumped at every sound and seeing Ezekiel's face in every shadow. My colleagues whispered behind my back, their concerned looks following me as I stumbled through the office like a ghost. I knew I was losing grips with reality. What could I do? Who would believe me if I told them I was being haunted by the ghost of a man whose life insurance policy I denied? As weeks passed, I grew gaunt and hollow-eyed. The boundaries between waking and sleeping, reality and nightmares becoming increasingly blurred. I would find myself in strange places with no memories of how I'd got there, standing on the roof of my apartment building, or in the middle of a graveyard across town. As always, I felt those blue eyes watching me. I knew I couldn't go on like this. Something had to give. In desperation, I decided to confront the source of my torment. I would go to Ezekiel Thorne's grave and what? Apologize? Beg for forgiveness? I didn't know, but I had to do something. The cemetery was eerily quiet as I made my way through the rows of headstones. The sun was setting, casting long shadows along the ground. I shivered, pulling my coat tighter around me. Finally, I found it. A simple granite headstone with the name Ezekiel Thorne carved into it. Below that was the date of his birth and his death, and at the bottom there was a single line. His claim was denied, but his spirit endures. I stood there, staring at those words as darkness fell around me. What was I doing here? What did I hope to accomplish? "I'm sorry," I whispered, feeling foolish but desperate. "I'm sorry I denied your application. I was just doing my job. Please, just leave me alone." The wind picked up, rustling the leaves of nearby trees. For a moment, I thought I heard a whisper on the breeze.
"Too late." Mr. Insurance Man. Far too late.
I turned to leave, my heart heavy with the realization that this had all been for nothing. But as I took a step away from the grave, the ground beneath my feet suddenly gave way. I fell, tumbling into darkness. The smell of damp earth filled my nostrils as I landed hard on something solid. As I lay there, winded and disoriented, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. The scrape of wood on wood, like a coffin lid being slowly opened. A bony hand emerged from the darkness, gripping my ankle. I was dragged deeper into the earth. The last thing I saw, a pair of pale blue eyes, gleaming with triumph.
Welcome,
Ezekiel's raspy voice echoed around me.
to your eternal policy, Mr. Insurance Man. I'm afraid the premiums are quite steep, but don't worry. We have all eternity to settle accounts.
The darkness closed in, and I knew that my claim on life had finally been denied. I jolted awake, my heart pounding so hard that I thought it might burst from my chest. The familiar surroundings of my bedroom slowly came into focus. Bathed in the soft glow of early morning light, I was drenched in sweat, the sheets tangled around my legs like a burial shroud. For a moment, relief washed over me. It had all been a dream, like a horrifically vivid nightmare, but a dream nonetheless. I let out an exhausted laugh, running my hands through my hair. I stumbled out of bed, my legs weak and unsteady. The world seemed to tilt, to swim around me as I made my way to the bathroom. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to shake off the lingering tendrils of my nightmare. But when I looked into the mirror, my blood ran cold. There, reflected in the glass behind me, were a pair of pale blue eyes. I whirled around, my heart in my throat, but the bathroom was empty. When I turned back to the mirror, they were gone again. I called in sick that day, unable to face the thought of dealing with more insurance claims. Instead, I spent hours researching hauntings, exorcisms, anything that might help me understand what was happening. But the more I read, the more helpless I felt. How could I fight something that shouldn't even exist? As night fell, I found myself dreading sleep. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw Ezekiel's withered face, those pale blue eyes boring into my soul. I tried everything to stay awake. Coffee, energy drinks, even slapping myself across the face. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and I drifted off into an uneasy slumber. The dream started as it always did. I was back at Everlast Insurance, Ezekiel's file open on my desk. This time, as I reached for the denied stamp, I hesitated. What if I approved it? Would that end the nightmares? With a trembling hand, I picked up the approved stamp instead. As it came down on the paper, I felt a rush of relief. Maybe now it would be over. But as I looked up, Ezekiel was there, his decaying face inches from mine.
Too late, Mr. Insurance Man, he rasped. Your policy has already been cashed in.
I woke up, screaming, thrashing against the sheets. As I fought to catch my breath, I realized something was different. The room smelled wrong, with formaldehyde and decay. I slowly turned my head towards the bedroom door. It was open. Standing in the doorway was a figure that I had hoped never to see in the waking world. Ezekiel Thorne shuffled into the room, his movements stiff and unnatural. In the dim light, I could see the waxy sheen of his skin, the sunken hollow of his cheeks, but it was the eyes that had me paralyzed. Those pale blue orbs, now cloudy with death, but still piercing
and their intensity. "Did you really think it would be that easy?" he wheezed, his voice like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "That you could simply stamp approved and wash your hands of me?" I tried to speak, to plead, to reason with him, but no sound came out. My body wouldn't respond, pinned to the bed by an unseen force. Ezekiel reached the side of the bed, looming over me. "You denied me in life, Mr. Insurance Man, but death is far more lenient. And now it's time to collect on your policy." He reached out a bony hand, his fingers pointing directly at my forehead. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for whatever was to come. But the touch never came. Instead, I heard a sound that did not belong. The shrill ring of a telephone. My eyes snapped open. I was alone in my bedroom, sunlight streaming through the windows. The phone on my nightstand continued to ring insistently. With a shaking hand, I picked it up. "Hello?" "Mr. Johnson," it was my boss's voice. "Where are you? You were supposed to be here an hour ago for the meeting with the new client." I glanced at the clock and cursed. I had overslept. "I'm sorry. I'll be right there," I stammered, already scrambling out of bed. As I rushed to get ready, my mind was reeling. Had it all been a dream? But the bruise on my forehead was still there, faded but visible. I made it to the office in record time, sliding into the conference room just as the meeting was starting. As I took my seat, trying to catch my breath, I froze. Sitting across the table, his pale blue eyes locked on mine, was Ezekiel Thorne. He looked different in the harsh fluorescent lights of the office. Less corpse-like, more human, but there was no mistaking those eyes. "Mr. Johnson, I'd like you to meet our new client, Mr. Thorne. He's interested in a rather unique life insurance policy." Ezekiel's lips curled into a small smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Insurance Man," he said, his voice dry but devoid of the otherworldly rasp I had come to associate with him. "I have a feeling we're going to be working very closely together." As he reached across the table to shake my hand, I saw the glint of triumph in those pale blue eyes. I knew with sickening certainty that this was only the beginning. The meeting passed in a blur. I nodded and smiled automatically, my mind racing as I tried to make sense of what was happening. How could Ezekiel be here, alive and well, when I'd seen his obituary, when he had haunted my dreams and invaded my waking hours as a decaying corpse? As the other attendees filed out of the room, Ezekiel lingered. He approached me slowly, his movements fluid and natural, nothing like the stiff, shuffling gait of the creature that had haunted me. "Quite a shock, isn't it, Mr. Johnson?" he said, softly, his pale blue eyes never leaving mine. "To see a dead man among the living." I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. I don't understand. You were... I saw you." Ezekiel's smile widened, revealing teeth that were just a shade too white, too perfect. "Death is not always as final as people believe, especially for those of us who have certain connections." He leaned in closer, and I caught a whiff of that familiar formaldehyde scent. "You denied my claim once, Mr. Insurance Man, but now I'm offering you a policy of your own, one that will guarantee your safety and sanity." What do you want?" I whispered, unable to look away from those hypnotic blue eyes. "It's simple, really. You'll be my personal insurance agent from now on. Every policy I bring you, you'll approve. No questions asked. In return, I'll ensure that your nights are peaceful, and your days, well, let's just say you won't have to worry about any unexpected visits.
I knew I should refuse. Every instinct screamed that this was wrong, dangerous, but the memories of those endless nightmares, the constant fear and paranoia, it was all too fresh.
Do we have a deal, Mr. Insurance Man?
Ezekiel extended his hand, his pale blue eyes gleaming with an otherworldly light. With a sense of finality, I reached out and shook his hand. His skin was cold and dry, like old parchment.
Excellent,
Ezekiel said, his smile growing impossibly wide.
I look forward to a long and profitable relationship.
As he turned to leave, he paused at the door.
Oh, and Mr. Johnson, sweet dreams.
That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept without nightmares. But as I drifted off, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just signed away something far more valuable than any insurance policy. And in the shadows of my room, I could have sworn I saw a pair of pale blue eyes watching, waiting, as I descended into dreamless sleep. The weeks that followed were a blur of surreal normalcy. By day, I went through the motions at work, approving every policy that crossed my desk with Ezekiel's name attached. They were always for astronomical sums, always for clients with medical histories that should have disqualified them immediately. But I stamped each one approved without hesitation, the memory of those nightmarish weeks still fresh in my mind. By night, I slept peacefully, undisturbed by visions of decay and whispers of eternity. But the price of this tranquility weighed heavily on my conscience. As the months wore on, I began to notice changes in myself. My reflection in the mirror looked older, somehow, gaunt. There were more streaks of gray in my hair that hadn't been there before. It was as if Ezekiel was slowly draining the life from me, one approved policy at a time. It was nearly a year to the day since I made my deal with him, before he called me into his office. Yes, he had an office now, a corner suite with a view of the city. As I entered, I noticed the smell of formaldehyde was stronger than ever.
Ah, Mr. Johnson, he said,
his pale blue eyes gleaming.
I have a special policy for you today, one I think you'll find particularly interesting.
He slid a folder across the desk. With a trembling hand, I opened it. Inside was a life insurance application. My life insurance application. As the meaning of his words sank in, I felt a chill run down my spine. This was it, the moment I'd been dreading all along. Ezekiel had never intended to let me go. He was going to claim me, just as he'd claimed all those other poor souls whose policy I'd approved. But in that moment of terror, something inside me snapped. I'd spent my whole career assessing risks, calculating odds, and suddenly I realized Ezekiel's power over me was built on fear. Fear that I'd given him willingly. No, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. Ezekiel's smile faltered.
I beg your pardon.
I stood up, looking him directly in those pale eyes. I said no. This wasn't part of our deal, and I'm done being afraid of you. For a moment, Ezekiel's facade slipped, revealing the decaying horror beneath. But I held my ground. You have no power over me, I continued, my confidence growing. You're nothing but a parasite, feeding on fear and bureaucracy, while I'm cutting you off. I grabbed the file with my application in it and tore it in half. As the pieces fell to the floor, I felt a surge of energy coursing through me. Ezekiel let out an inhuman shriek, lunging across the desk at me. But his movements were slow,
clumsy, as if he were struggling to maintain his form in our world. I dodged his grasping hands and ran for the door. As I threw it open, I shouted to the stunned office, "Everyone listen! Don't approve any more of his policies. He has no power if we don't give it to him." Chaos erupted in the office. Some people screamed, others looked confused, but I saw understanding dawn in a few faces. Those who, like me, had been haunted by nightmares of pale blue eyes and the smell of formaldehyde. As I ran through the building, shouting my warning, I heard Ezekiel's enraged howls behind me. But with each person who listened, each policy that was questioned instead of blindly approved, his voice grew fainter. I burst out of the building, into the sunlight, gasping for breath. For a moment, I thought I saw Ezekiel's withered face in the reflection of a nearby window, those pale blue eyes filled with impotent rage. But then it was gone, fading like a bad dream in the morning light. In the days that followed, there was an investigation. Hundreds of fraudulent policies were uncovered, all traced back to the mysterious Ezekiel Thorne, who seemed to have vanished into thin air. The company underwent a major overhaul, with a new emphasis on ethical practices and thorough vetting. As for me, I slept peacefully for the first time in what felt like years. The nightmares were gone, banished along with the specter of Ezekiel Thorne. I'd learned a valuable lesson about the power of facing your fears and the importance of reading the fine print. Sometimes on dark nights, I think I catch a whiff of formaldehyde or see a flash of pale blue eyes in the shadows. But I'm not afraid anymore. After all, I know the truth now. No ghost, no matter how malevolent or cunning, can stand against the power of human will and a properly denied insurance claim. We're coming up on the middle again, but don't worry. There's a lot more stories in store, for you and for me as well. Let's move into a subject that always gets people excited around this channel, for obvious reasons. Don't worry, it's not the grandpa you're thinking about, though. You'll have to wait for another great-grandpa story to hear about him. But today, we'll be hearing a tale from Rage and Serenity 24 about a particular seat you might not want to take. Let's hear about Grandpa's chair.
I tried to sleep, but I remembered the black skies, the lightning too. It was all around me. I remembered each flash as time began to blur. Each flash had lit him up that evening, revealing to me the ravages of his face, of his pale, disheveled, decaying body, of the clothes which had ages and ages ago been white, torn now in several places, yellowing and covered in stains. I had shuddered at the sight, tempted to shut my eyes, his eyes too, as they glared and kept glaring at me, through me. Ma hadn't seen him, as always. She had in fact floated right past the rocking chair that had once been his favorite spot to read, but to me, he had never been more real. He had been in the chair that day as well. One doesn't simply abandon an old favorite, after all. Hunched over, with limbs bent in awkward ways, and skin clinging onto bones for dear life. A grotesque, formless lump, a shadow. Yet he had been anything but quiet. The rumbling thunder had failed to drown out the sounds of his chattering teeth ringing in my ears. Had I imagined that look in his eyes? Had I imagined his raspy voice trying to call out my name? "Bordoizila is going home," Ma had whispered, standing by the kitchen window while smiling at the storm outside, at the trees flailing about in answer to the angry wind. I had known that name quite well, known just as well the havoc its owner was famous for wreaking wherever she went. Bordoizila, the newly married wind spirit, rushing through the towns and villages in her path, eagerly making her way back to her mother on her first trip home from her husband's house. That was the tale, told and retold for centuries within every house in Assam by wizened old mouths with tobacco-stained teeth, holding the attention of every child sitting there. I had inched closer and closer to Ma, the fear of the ghost getting the better of me, as it often did. Seldom had I seen such peace on her face as I saw at that moment. For the longest time, Ma had continued to look out into our backyard in silence. The wind had cried and howled, so loud I had tugged hard at her stole, insisting upon her presence, squealing to her how he had long been glaring at me. Much like on the occasions gone by, Ma had rolled her eyes. Not this again, her gaze had seemed to tell me. Can no one in this house let me have a moment to myself? Barely turning, she had passed me the bowl soon after, half filled with flattened rice and mashed bananas and bread, along with a glass of water. Give this to your grandfather. Go on, she said, before turning back to the window. I had no choice. Slowly, my trembling hands had taken the bowl up to him. I remember those skies very well. I remember them as a 10-year-old, when he, too, had at last traveled homeward one night. Death had come for my grandfather, almost begrudgingly, one would think, in his sleep, close to a year after that stormy April evening. Strangely enough, I remember them best now, when most other things are hard to remember. All the faces, the names, the numbers, when the grays and whites mingle in my matted hair as I lie in bed, every day dragging on longer than a year. I can feel my form shrinking to nothing. I can feel the wind outside growing stronger.
That one was a little short, but I think we can all agree it's a powerful story, nonetheless. Let's move on to a piece by, I suppose this particular writer preferred to remain anonymous, but his story is a good one, nonetheless. So, let's hope when the situation arises, if it arises for you, you find yourself a little better equipped, so you don't find yourself exclaiming, I don't know what to do.
Something is following me. I swear I can hear them at night outside my tent. I went on this solo 7-day hike, and it wasn't until the third day that I noticed something was amiss. When I woke and exited my tent, my small makeshift camp looking as if it had been ransacked, my supplies scattered, small fire pit I had made had been destroyed, as though a large beast had stomped on it. The scariest part was the footprints left behind. They were all over the camp. They circled the tent dozens of times and seemed to come to rest at the door before heading away into the woods. I hadn't heard anything while I slept, and I assumed that it was just some hikers playing a trick on me. After I gathered my scattered supplies, I started back down the trail. The hike I was on was a remote and technically difficult hike that even the most seasoned hikers would have trouble accomplishing, which is what made me confused. Why would experienced hikers do something like that to my camp? Most hikers took this sport seriously. Ruining supplies could be a quick way to die from exposure. That day I hiked long and far, taking switchbacks and pausing for minutes at a time to watch the trail behind me. The mountain was empty. I even removed some of my footprints in the dirt, hoping to make it harder to track. That night I packed all my supplies in my tent and waited, certain that no one would have been able to follow me. I gripped my flashlight in one hand and lay down in my sleeping bag, waiting for a sound or a noise out of the normally silent woods. That's when I heard it, a twig snapping, the rustle of a bush, a rock being kicked and rolled across the ground. Tension shot through my body, and I froze, unable to move. My original plan was to rip open the tent door and shine my flashlight in my would-be stalker's face, but the sounds I heard made me look up. That wasn't the sound of humans. I saw no lights and heard no boots. Instead, it was the shuffle of something bestial, a large bear or a pack of wolves, maybe. Instantly, the sound grew closer, and I thought it had to be more than one animal circling the tent. pawing at the ground, breathing heavy and hoarse. A small sound coming from the back of a throat that sounded like a throaty, demented version of a laugh. Yuck, yuck, was the noise they made as they circled my tent, never coming close enough to touch or even graze it. Fear struck me hard and fast, and my first reaction was to curl up in my sleeping bag as if hiding from the world was my ultimate defense, like a little kid defending himself from a monster under the bed. Now I protect myself from the monsters outside the tent. The motion outside the tent exploded as the pace increased. The demented laughing was now coming from all sides, and I covered my ears trying to block out the noise before it drove me mad. Then, like a breeze in the wind, they were gone. The sounds slipped away into the night, and the torment stopped. My breath fell from my chest in what felt like minutes. I was terrified, and rightly so. Being alone on the mountain was always a bad idea. Hikers went missing here all the time. I just assumed they were inexperienced and got lost. Now I knew it was something more, something terrifyingly real. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay awake, unable to leave the tent for fear that they'd return, for the fear that they were waiting out there quietly for me to slip up and leave. When dawn's rays crested the hill to the east and bathed my tent in God's eternal light, I prayed for the first time in years. Normally, I'm not one for religious zeal, but I fell to my knees in that morning light and begged with tears in my eyes for any God to save me, to take me from this mountain, but nothing responded to my desperate plea. Now, I felt truly alone. The camp was a mess. The ground was torn up by dozens of odd footprints. They overlapped so much that I couldn't get an accurate shape to one, but they were deep prints indicating weight. Larger than dogs, at least, I said to myself as I traced my finger over one of the prints. I glanced around the camp and saw the footprints leading off back down the mountain the way I'd come. I was already more than halfway through the hike, and it would take me longer to go back the way I had come. Once I reached the peak, I could make my way down the opposite side, and the parking lot was where my truck was. By my calculations, it was around 3 more days and 2 more nights. I could make it. I hiked hard and fast that day and made great time. The mountain ended in a plateau, and I rested for only a moment. Normally, I would spend the day at the top, find a nice place to camp, and bask in the world from my seat on high. Today I left instantly, glancing only for a moment to check my path. I could see my truck far below in the parking lot. The way down was a rocky path that normally I wouldn't have attempted, but this was an emergency. The sun was getting low, and I needed to find a place to camp. As I reached the edge of the woods, I paused and watched the sun as it fell faster and faster. A small clearing lay out before me in the long grass. To my back were all tall, sturdy trees with lots of branches at odd angles, like they were protecting me from the beasts that lurked behind me. I decided to set up my tent in the clearing, a few feet from the trees, next to a fallen tree with a large mass of roots exposed to the night sky. I kept looking over my shoulder as I worked, knowing these creatures only come out at night. Sweat beaded down my neck as I took a moment when I was done to drink some water and eat something from my pack. I gathered a large amount of wood from the trees and used some of my emergency lighter fluid to start a big cook fire outside my tent, with enough wood to burn for hours. An idea struck me while I ate and watched the trees. Taking my flashlight and gear, I made for the trees and climbed high. Along the branches, I found a secure spot where I could sit comfortably, and better yet, where I could watch my tent. For an hour, I sat in terrified silence, my heart beating out of my chest as I tried to calm myself. Maybe they wouldn't come tonight. Maybe I'd made it far enough away that they wouldn't be able to find me. That's when the noises started. The twigs snapping, the rustle of a bush behind me, the the careful step of something coming closer and closer. I hugged tightly to the tree, keeping myself hidden from the sight below. My eyes were on the tent, wanting to see what was doing this. Tonight, I'd see them in the firelight of my camp below. The grass below my perch was now covered in darkness, but I could hear something moving there. I held my breath, hoping to avoid detection. The creatures would pass me with no hesitation. I watched as the shadows moved in the darkness below, too many of them to count in the poor light. They surrounded the tent and fire, silent as they moved. When one of them made that same sound from the back of their throat, it went hook-yook, and as if on signal, the campfire was scattered. Lit logs rolled and flew away as if something had swatted it with a giant hand. I could see bits of brown fur in the descending firelight, a large muscular paw, a hind leg, all covered in the same brown fur. Once the dark fell, they began taking their places, tearing up the ground around my camp. There, back of the throat laughing, I could hear my tent tearing. Deep growls of inhuman noise and heavy breathing for hours. They never left. They searched the same ground over and over again, as if blind, until an hour before dawn. Then they quietly slunk away, back up the mountain towards the peak. I hadn't slept at all, and I was feeling exhausted. My legs felt weak, and I slid down the last few feet of the tree, landing hard on my back. I lay there breathing heavy as the light from the morning sun bathed me in warm light. My tent had been shredded to pieces, and I now had no doubt in my mind that they were hunting me. Blood was on the ground beside the fire, where it looked like something had happened. Maybe the creatures had a fight amongst themselves during the night. I sighed, examining the tent, dropping the pieces of it I held. I turned and made my way down the rocky trail. Gone were the lush trees and the long grass of the peaks, and once more I plunged into the rocky, steep trail to the base. The trail was slow going as I climbed down rock faces and had to backtrack several times to find a different path. I could not spend one more night in this place. Far below, I could see my old red pickup truck in the parking lot, within my vision, but still far away. If I had a base jumping kit, I could be down there in a minute instead of hours. At various spots, I had to anchor with ropes that had been placed by previous climbers. I praised them and their families with good fortune, as this put a large distance between myself and the beasts. I traveled through the day and resolved myself to continue through the night. With no tent or cover, I'd be torn to shreds by those things. As the sun began to set, I doubled my pace. I knew somewhere along here was a rappelling site, a place with hundreds of feet of strong rope for you to descend to the final drop. After that, it was a short 5-minute walk to the truck. I couldn't find the rappel spot. I knew it had to be around here somewhere, but it seemed I was lost. I had seen the rappelling spot from my truck, but it seemed that now I was on the mountain, I could have missed it in dusk's light. I knew I had to backtrack slightly and made my way back up. Fear struck me again, knowing that the beasts were coming. As I climbed, I saw a bright green rope hanging from a series of anchors in the rock. I attached my harness and walked backwards off the rock. This is something I'd done a dozen times or more, and I made good time. Halfway down, I rested for a moment as the sun set behind me. That's when I felt it, something pulling on the rope above me. I jerked and began swinging side to side. I dropped slightly before I felt something pulling me back up the mountain. I began to rappel with increased fervor and dropped down the mountain faster than I had ever dropped before. I reached the bottom, but noticed the rope had shortened about 20 feet and was slowly getting higher. The ground below was rocky and rough, but I had no choice. I unclipped myself from the line and dropped quickly to the ground. I landed awkwardly on a stone with my left leg and felt my ankle twist. I screamed out in pain, my leg burning. Despite this, I smiled. I'd escaped. The beasts weren't going to catch me now. I could see my red pickup truck down the hill, and I rose to my feet. The pain was intense, but I kept going, knowing this was my only chance. Behind me, I heard the impossible sound of rocks scattering as something heavy landed. I didn't dare glance over my shoulder, but I doubled my pace. I could hear heavy breathing and movement behind me. A small glade of young trees lay in my path, and I ducked into the thin branches for any sort of cover from the relentless pursuer. Yuck, yuck, came from behind me, and I froze, letting the foliage cover my face from sight. I barely dared to breathe as I heard the branches snapping around me. I could smell the foul breath of the beast as it crouched in a thin shield of branches and foliage. A poor armor indeed. Heavy breathing came closer and closer to me until it was right beside my ear. That back of the throat laugh came out right beside my ear, making fear shoot up my spine and paralyzing me to the spot. This was it. The end. Whatever this creature was, it was going to kill me. I chanced a glance in its direction and stared right into its repulsive face. It bore a resemblance to a shaved wolf with its skin pulled back, a large mouth filled with raw and dangerously sharp teeth, and a large brown nose like a dog. Saliva dripped from its open mouth as it breathed in ragged breaths. The oddest part was its eyes. They were all white and filled with clouds, almost as if the creature was blind. I sat perfectly still as it sat within feet of me. It had a hunched back, almost like a human, but it moved on all fours like an animal. The creature smelled at the air briefly before growling and moving away through the foliage, making that yuck yuck sound as it left, as if it were mocking my fear. The creature couldn't see, I assumed. It reacted on movement, sound, maybe smell, maybe even all three. As the creature moved away, I quietly limped in the opposite direction towards the truck. Finally, I was in the parking lot, in the truck. I locked the door behind me and lay down on the seat, breathing for a moment, planning my next move. With a jerk, I started the truck. My old faithful girl turned on in a single stroke. I flicked on my headlights and my heart stopped. In front of me was a dozen or so of the beasts, all crouched over, their eyes a milky pale unseeing. As the headlights hit their eyes, the beasts changed. They covered their eyes in pain, and I put the truck in drive. As I stepped on the gas, I realized my mistake. The fire that one night in the tree, the way they attacked it. With a smash, I felt one of them ram into the tailgate. I sped off down the road, swerving to avoid them. In my rear view, I could see them chasing me down the dark mountain road, and I sped up, keeping ahead of them. My ankle throbbed painfully, but I felt nothing as my adrenaline peaked again and again, and my fear warped into a new thing by the moment. The last I saw was their pale eyes in the darkness as I turned the corner onto the highway. By the time I saw other cars and people, I knew I was safe, and I drove nonstop for hours until I made it back to my place. The sun was just about to set as I locked the door behind me. I breathed a sigh of relief and poured myself a glass of scotch to calm my nerves. I fell against my bed and took a sip of my drink before I lay back in my blankets, exhausted from my fight with the creatures and them chasing me. I fell asleep in minutes. I woke up in the middle of the night to something outside my house. It sounded like something rubbing up against the front door. My heart froze as I thought of what it could be. That's when a slight knock sounded at the door, just loud enough for me to hear before a sound that chilled me to the bone. A deep laugh coming from the back of someone's throat. Hook yuck.
One more story for you. And then, I think it might be time for so long. But don't worry, I've saved one of my very best for last. You know, you always hear that you can do anything in Vegas, but what you do there stays in Vegas. Well, let's hope that whatever this person followed into the desert stays in Vegas. But the story itself is still a good one. So let's hear about how the teller, a one Matthew Dewey, walked with the dead men in the desert.
It started as a weekend trip to Las Vegas. A 3-day weekend was coming up, so my friends wanted to add spice to their lives, and Vegas was on the bucket list. Not mine, theirs. I wanted to stay home and watch old cartoons I'd bought from the video store. Maybe just sleep in that Friday. Maybe I didn't make it clear to them, or maybe they just ignored me, but they had already bought me a plane ticket and booked a hotel room. With it being too late to refund anything, and out of financial obligation, I couldn't let that money go to waste and be a bad, boring friend. We landed and reached the hotel before noon. I had 5 friends with me, and everyone was feeling the excitement, especially one, Sadie. Sadie was the group extrovert, the leader. She didn't suggest Vegas, but she sure as hell put herself in charge the moment the others considered the trip. Standing in front of us in the hotel lobby, she held a list of places for us to check out. I stood by and let her list them off, everyone casting votes on which place to skip, which place to start with, and which ones to save for last. What we ended up with was a schedule starting with the most fun and the physically demanding stuff, gradually leading towards the more exciting, unsavory stuff. I had already mentally decided to call it when evening rolled around, to avoid the clubs. I guess I am the boring friend after all. I will say this about Vegas. A lot of places were surprisingly clean. Don't get me wrong, we saw plenty of streets that looked like the physical manifestation of a painful hangover, but many were straight out of Hollywood. It's colorful, it's loud, it's a theme park that people live in. It was almost surreal when you ended up on streets that looked plain or ordinary. Men in suits, kids leaving school, that kind of thing. I guess I knew very little about Las Vegas, of course. A lot of it is normal, but still, I found it interesting. When you turned onto a street where the buildings looked like modern art, I knew I'd be in for a hell of a time. Day drinking, slot machines, live shows, you name it. I can admire the work and effort they put into all of it, but it just wasn't for me. When we had dinner at what I thought was a nice casino restaurant, until I saw the male servers were in very tight, revealing outfits, I had just about mentally checked out. "Hey, I think I'm done," I said, before the chorus of ahs could get any louder. "I'm tired. The flight gave me a headache and everything." "Take a pill in my purse," one of them said. I think rest is better right now. You guys have fun, though. Try not to stay out too late. I felt older with every word and excuse. I'm 28, and I was talking like I was 48. That being said, the amount of free relief I felt walking into that empty hotel room was criminal, and I must have felt tired to some degree because the bed I fell onto had my eyes drooping. It was the cool, soft Egyptian cotton sheets that had me feeling that sleep was the finest pleasure on earth. I know that says a lot about me, but still, it was pretty good. I turned on the TV and flicked through the channels, finally ending up on a new episode of How It's Made. Well, maybe it was an old episode, I don't know. What I can say for sure is that my brain was locked in, and as the sun fell behind the horizon, I was gone. I woke up to a call. My phone was buzzing beside my head, the vibration doing more to wake me up than the light-hearted jingle I had set for a ringtone. I said the name, Sadie. Yeah, I groaned. What's up? It's 5 in the morning. Where are you guys?
Hey, you're really missing out. Sadie's voice was garbled by music. We're up the road, towards the red place. We're in the club with the big green monster truck out front. You can't miss it. Come on.
You underestimate me, I muttered. I turned over in bed and looked out the window. The city was alive, even after a full night. Lights and sounds, the distant thump of music. There had to be some stellar muting in the walls because I could see that the party was not far away. I thought about going. It was the idea of missing out that bothered me a little, because I didn't think I was missing out. Yet when so many people you call friends say that you are, you start to wonder if you really know how to live at all. Maybe the happiness you feel from simple things isn't as potent as the happiness you get while being drunk in a club with your friends. Screw that, I said. I knew that was a dumb way of thinking, but I also didn't feel that tired anymore. The least I could do was enjoy the trip my own way, and at that moment, I just wanted to go for a walk. Not in the streets, of course, but I did remember Sadie mentioning on her list of activities a walk thing just outside of town. I was the only one who was interested, and she didn't seem too enthusiastic when she had told us about it. I got out of bed and texted her, asking for the address, to which she sent me the Google business thing. No official page or anything, just a bare-bones minimum. It lacked that Vegas flair everything had, and for me, that was a plus. Just after midday, I arrived at the place. I paid the taxi guy and jumped out into the heat. I always had decent clothes for outdoors with me. It was like my entire wardrobe. Yet the heat was still a surprise. I guess being in a cool car for half an hour would make it feel like stepping into an oven. The trail started a small collection of shacks, with one large building that looked like it was in good condition. It was painted an ugly yellow with small cartoonish paints all around it, like a cactus character, a tumbleweed, with some classic Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote thrown in for good measure. I don't think they were going for a cowboy theme, but that's what I felt when I saw the owner. A tall woman wearing chaps, a 10-gallon hat, and a checkered shirt. She looked like she had seen some things, just shocking the way the skin beneath her eyes seemed to bubble. Yet, when she saw me, she gave me the warmest smile. "You must be Cassandra, right?" she greeted, marching over with her hands outstretched. Yes, that's me," I said, holding mine out. She took and shook my arm like a wet noodle. "I'm not too late?" "Not at all. Some eccentric fellows are already set up for the first group today. There's still time to join them before they go." "Group?" "Yeah, I find it better to send people in groups. Less chance of people getting lost or bunching up on the trail. Better for pictures, you see." "Right. We also have a route for horses, if you're interested in..." No horses. They scare me. I'll stick with the walking group." "Fair enough. I won't press you." I always hated when people said that. Nothing made me feel more pressured. Still, she was the sweetest lady, sweeter than honey and iced tea. I didn't say anything more and followed her to the start of the trail. There was clear signage with numbers near the fence and gate, indicating the different trails. The trail she pointed me to didn't have a sign or a number. "The first group should be waiting there." She pointed down the trail towards a huge rock. "They all set to leave in 5 minutes. Do you have anything you need?" "Water, hat, sunscreen," I said. "Good. It's hot now, but it'll get cool later. Little known fact about the desert," she said, pointing up a finger as if she expected me to take notes. I knew that already, of course. I nodded and started walking up the trail towards the rock. She already started her march back to the main building. I was feeling pretty good, excited even. I love the oppressiveness of the desert, and I was hoping that being 20 minutes out of Vegas,
I would get to enjoy the natural beauty of it all. There was a group of people waiting by the rock, but looking at them was a little weird. I mean, I don't want to show my ignorance, but I think they were religious or just had some kind of cultural thing going on. Maybe I was about to walk with some foreigners from overseas, or it was some kind of LARP group. I didn't know. There was at least 20 people there, and it was hard to tell if they were all men or not, because they were dressed in robes from head to toe. Not flowing robes either, but a lot more neat and constructed. My first real thought wasn't, what the hell are they wearing, but how the hell haven't they melted? All but one of their robes was red, but the last one, which was black. He stood tall and straight, the first one to turn in my direction. Upon seeing them, I was already psyching myself up to say something. Approaching the group of people alone was terrifying. As you can guess, Sadie and her group are the only ones who adopted me at work. I was just happy they did, because I would have never gone up to them otherwise. Room for one more? I said with a forced smile. I was quiet at first, but I supposed it was better to be a little too quiet than a little too loud. The ones in the red robes turned from me and looked at the one in black. Please do. Have you ever been on this trail before? The man said. No, first time. Be sure to stick close and conserve your energy. It is to be a long walk. The man in the black robe pointed towards the desert, the distant rocks and the sparse foliage. It felt so surreal, but also right, like I had stepped into the adventure I wanted. Only something kept throwing me off. It was the silence from such a large group. When we started on the path, I didn't hear anything from the people in the red robes. The only ones I had heard speak up until that moment was the man in the black robe. He would speak to me every few minutes, usually to point something out, but the gaps between those moments were growing longer. Initially, I thought he was a guide, but it became clear as he drifted into the others that he was just familiar with the trail. I was too shy to keep the conversation going, finding myself just enjoying the sights. The range of colors was just incredible. So many people think the desert is just muted, dry color, but there are just so many different shades of light and dark. The vibrant oranges when we found ourselves in the ravine were stunning. We followed a stream in that shallow ravine until the trail opened into the desert again, just in time to see the sun settle beyond the horizon. The sky becomes like blood, the man in the black robe said behind me. I jumped, not at his voice, but because I thought I was at the back of the group. I wanted to keep everyone in view. A beautiful red, yes? I turned to look at him. He was looking at me. I could see his eyes, his pale skin through the slit in the robe. It was odd to look at because his hands were dark. Another culture thing, maybe. When I had finally registered his words as a question, I stuttered in response. Oh, yeah, I said, feeling a chill run down my spine. I took the hoodie out of my backpack and pulled it on. Amazing how fast the cold comes in too, huh? Yes. Do you think you can make the walk back? He asked. We should almost be there, so... No, we are quite far now, he corrected. By night, the journey back should be quicker, but 5 hours seems about right. My heart sank. I thought we had taken some turns and were just about to see the start of the trail again over the hill. Yet, looking around, I should have been able to see that distant glow of Vegas. Instead, all I saw was dark, robed figures shambling ever onward into the desert. My water had run out, my phone had long since died, and I was hungry. My panic was stiff at first, but I began to hear it in my voice. Then, let's turn back, I said. You can go back. We're heading somewhere else, the man in black said. Is it close? Very, but you won't be able to join us. not as you are." He looked me up and down, and I wondered if he was referring to my clothes and how I stood out amongst them, but something in his eyes showed a different kind of disgust. It was like my entire existence didn't fit in, not just my clothes. His tone was growing more serious, less friendly. He was losing patience. At that point, I noticed a building noise, a rumbling, which I mistook for chatter amongst the men and women in red robes. But as it grew louder, it sounded more like an uncoordinated hum, like they were all humming a song that none of them knew the lyrics to. Again, "Too late," he murmured, "as it should be. So it is." "Too late?" I repeated. "Mind where you step. Once your weight is on your foot, your choice is made." The humming had reached a breaking point in tone. The night sky became a lot darker. The stars, the moon, they vanished. The midnight blue became pitch black, a surreal void. It felt like something was blocking it out of sight, because that same darkness seemed to move wherever I looked. Yet the desert remained illuminated by some strange source of light. I could see the red robes against the pitch black, and I watched as they marched across the sand. I was overwhelmed by a sense of dread, a feeling of weakness. My whole body began to ache, and every effort seemed to strain my muscles and even my bones. I knew this feeling, the one bubbling inside me. It was many years ago when I was a child. I was coughing in bed constantly, day after day. That weakness kept me wondering how hollow I could get. I felt as weak and flimsy as a thin plastic bag. My heart, I could feel its every beat, as if all my insides were numb, and only it soldiered on. I was waiting for it to give out. The people in the red robes began to shed their blood-red fabric, naked forms that began to age and decay before my eyes. A space in the inky void ahead of me opened up, a shining white door, tall and thin. The way was clear, and I didn't have it in me to walk on. I was terrified. "Why are you scared?" the man in the black robe asked. "What awaits you is an end to the pain. Keep walking strong." He placed his hand on my shoulder and guided me. The people ahead of me were growing more grotesque by the second. I had no idea what made their bodies, so I was made to watch them unmake themselves. The skin, the fat, the pus, the blood, the shades of red began to turn blue and green. My head was burning inside. I felt dehydrated. While my body was in a state of shock and fear, my mind was trying its best to grip reality, to steer me away. The man in the black robe seemed to sense it, because he stopped walking and looked at me. With all my energy, I looked at him. "You cannot go back now. Your life is with them. It is only natural to pass over to the next plane." I felt the heat of my tears. It was just like those nights years ago. The very real fear of death. I'm ashamed of it now, but I wasn't thinking of my loved ones, not even my family. I didn't think of all the wrongs I'd done, the regrets I had. When I looked into that man's eyes, all I thought was, why now? The man seemed to sigh, but I didn't hear the exhale. His shoulders slumped, and the humming faded completely. The shambling corpses turned around to look back at me with their empty eye sockets. "The dead must be laid to rest. It is only natural. The earth will bind the body and free the spirit." The man in black grabbed both my shoulders, twisting me around, and began to lay me on the ground as if I weighed nothing. I couldn't move. I could only watch as he began to scoop sand with his hands over me. I heard the rumbling again, but it sounded angry. I looked up as far as I could. It made my neck ache. I could see the world upside down, the white arch, and the silhouettes of the dead against the divine light. The corpses were moving closer, and they radiated malice. More tears, and even a pathetic whimper. "Hush," the man in the black robe said. "They are not upon you yet." He was working fast, and only a few seconds later, I could feel sand over every inch of my body. He finished by pouring the sand over my face, covering me completely. I heard the dead close in. I heard a muttering of words, then I heard his scream. I try not to imagine the pain one must feel to make those sounds. He was still alive, but his cries grew further away as they carried him towards the white arch. I could gather that much from what I heard. As his voice faded, the rumbling ceased and strength returned to my body. I could breathe, and I was breathing in sand, was choking, gasping. I sat up, coughing and sputtering. I noticed immediately the pink and purple hue of the sky. On my back, I felt the warmth of the morning sun. Looking all around, I saw nothing. No dead people, no man in black, no inky sky, no white arch. All the evidence I had was the blood on the sand, and it's trailing off before stopping completely. I found a road and somebody to point me in the direction of Vegas, but they weren't willing to give me a lift back. Luckily, after an hour or two of walking, someone else did. I watched as we drove past the road leading to the yellow building where the trail began. I think I even saw Dorothy talking to a group of tourists. When I arrived at the hotel, I dug my room key out of my sandy backpack and held it to the front of the machine. It still worked, and a few seconds later I was taking a shower, trying to let the hot water bring a little more warmth to my body. After a while, I thought about the man in black. He wasn't a dead man, not like the others. He didn't seem evil, but he didn't seem sane either. No matter what the conclusion I made about him, I realized that he saved my life, and he paid the price for it. It was a thought that snapped everything into place, and I cried in the shower as all the feelings rushed at me once again. I spoke about this experience to only one person, a priest. I don't think he believed a word I said, not really. I think he thought I was talking about a dream or a nightmare. Yet he showed enough concern to say something wise and biblical about sacrifice. It wasn't his words that convinced me to redefine my faith. It was the thought of believing in nothing when something like that happened to me. It didn't sit right. That's what I gained for the price that someone else paid. I pray that it's enough. Sounds like the rain is starting to taper off, and I guess that means it's time for us to say so long again before I cast you out into the wide world to find a little horror of your own. Until next time, this is Dr. Plague, wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.